Thank you again to our speaker, Judith and Shelley, and to you, Francesca, for this wonderful session. We have had thousands of people listening and commenting. So thank you for all of those wonderful questions and comments that are coming through. Truly, allyship requires empathy, education, and commitment. And to create diverse organizations, we must create opportunities for the best diverse talent and not just accept them, but cherish and celebrate them as well. So if progress requires women leadership, then how do we help women leaders thrive? To explore how women leaders can increase the power of others, I'll hand over to Alyse Nelson, co-founder and CEO of Vital Voices, and herself an alumni of the Women's Forum Rising Talent Initiative. Her leadership at Vital Voices has amplified women's impact around the world, and her recently published book, Vital Voices, 100 Women Using Their Power to Empower, is a collection of beautifully illustrated stories of these women and their work. Alyse, over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Sophie, and huge thank you to the Women's Forum. Only wish we could all be together in Paris, but I think the power and potential of technology is that this conversation and all of the conversations going on over the next few days are going out to so many more people to share the important work and the important message. So as Sophie said, Vital Voices is a global nonprofit, and what we do is we invest in women who have a daring vision to really bring positive change to their communities. They are human rights defenders, healthcare innovators, social entrepreneurs, graffiti artists, documentary filmmakers. They range, and they are very different from different cultures and communities and backgrounds. But these leaders are all advancing creative solutions to the most urgent challenges of our time, from the climate crisis to racial justice, gender-based violence, and economic inequities. I think what we at Vital Voices have recognized over the last 23 years, working across 182 countries with more than 18,000 women leaders, is that women lead differently. They seek power to empower others. And that difference, I'm convinced, is precisely what our world needs today. If we've seen anything in this last year, in 2020, it is just how critical leadership is. I believe that women's leadership is resonating around the world because it comes from an authentic place, a place of empowerment, empathy, and innovation. So as Sophie mentioned, this fall, Vital Voices published a book with Alyse featuring the original artwork from talented artist Gail Kabaker, and featuring 100 women leaders who were truly using their power, their voice, their platform, their influence, their networks, their talents to empower and uplift others. And we believe that's what leadership's about. I'm thrilled to have two of the leaders featured in the book here with me today. I'm going to introduce them to you, although I'm sure many of you are very well aware of their work. Obi Ezekwesili is the former presidential candidate from Nigeria. She is also the founder of the Bring Back Our Girls movement and has held many of the most senior jobs in government, in the World Bank, and beyond. Jamira Burley is an impact strategist and one of the United States' leading activists who's really been on the front lines of galvanizing young people in the fight against racial inequities, economic opportunities, and greater gender equity. So both of them are Vital Voices honorees and part of our global network of women around the world. So thank you both for joining me.
Always good to see you, Alyse.
So Obi, I'm going to start with you. Oh, I'm sorry, Jamira.
Oh, no. Just thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Wonderful. So Obi, I want to start with you. I think that more often than not, women come to leadership because they see wrong in their community and they want to step up to right it. And I'm wondering, with your leadership path, was it similar? Is that what happened? You saw a wrong and wanted to step up and rise to leadership to right that wrong?
So that's definitely a major part of it for me. But I often trace my leadership trajectory to when I was younger, when I was actually about 10 years old. When I turned 10 that morning, I simply said to my dad and mom, I want to have a meeting with you. And my mom just rolled her eyes at me and said, meeting. And my dad said, of course, let's have a meeting. And my conversation was to say to them that, look, I am now an adult, and anyone who talks to me in this house must talk to me like they're talking to an adult. And I said to them, I'm going to do every responsibility that I have in this house. And in response to that, nobody must talk to me anyhow again. And my mom, many decades after, would always say to people that from that moment, I actually stepped into a place of service, because I always heard my father say that I lead, I serve, therefore I lead. And I just loved what that meant. So if I am serving, that's my leadership. And so I became someone who, anytime there was need to serve, I served. And my dad was someone, together with my mom, that reinforced my voice. Because they reinforced my voice, I learned to be assertive in terms of what I would like to see happen. And at that level of serving in my parents' home, I became a leader, because I had to persuade my brothers and my sister. I had to persuade the people who lived with us. I had to inspire them to agree to do what I wanted them to do. I had to be stern when I needed to be. And so it was a kind of laboratory for me. And so what I've seen over the years is that whatever I did as a child at that time has in fact reflected at every level and milestone of my leadership process. So when I think of the times that I stepped up and fought on behalf of my classmate who was being bullied, that I was expressing leadership. And so as I fought for my classmate in primary school, or stood up to a soldier who was sent to my school in secondary school and who was being very violent with students, or when I got out of university and I stood out there fighting against the military and saying militarization must end in my country, at every stage, it was always about something is wrong, somebody needs to speak, and I would step up and speak, and not worry about the cost. I seldom ever worried about the cost. That worries me, actually, but I don't ever worry about the cost of taking a stand.
Well, that's wonderful for many women, that sort of journey to find their path and their leadership, and the sort of consistent reinforcement that they're on the right path. And Jamira, I want to turn to you, because your leadership journey really started from tragedy and from really harnessing that pain into something that was extremely powerful for not just you, but for so many others. Can you talk a bit about that path and how you maybe found yourself somewhat reluctantly, maybe because you were so young, really in a leadership position?
That's a really great question. And I have to say that it's reluctant is actually probably the best way to describe it, especially now when I look back on, the lived experiences of people who look like me. Oftentimes we don't wake up one day and say we want to be an activist. We do so because of the real realities of our existence and how we're directly impacted by issues like gun violence. For me, it was when I was 15. When I was 15 years old, my brother Andre was shot and killed in Philadelphia. And I remember thinking, one, how did this occur? Two, why were violence such a normal occurrence in my community, and why didn't young people have a more substantial role in helping to prevent it? And so after watching my brother lose his life to gun violence and seeing more people in my community be impacted by everything from gun violence, criminal justice reform, and just a sense of hopelessness, I wanted to figure out what were the solutions needed for change. And so a lot of my work centered around gun violence when I first became an activist. But as over the last 15 years, I realized that there's so many systematic problems wrong with our society. And oftentimes gun violence is the outside face of real problems that we have to solve. And one of those ways that we have to solve it is ensuring that young people have a leadership role in providing solutions for change that enables for them to share their story in a way that provides texture to the real realities that they're facing in their communities.
So of course, 2020 was supposed to be a celebratory year, right? I mean, yeah. 2020 was we were supposed to be celebrating 25 years since the UN Fourth World Conference on Women, and one of the most progressive documents for women's advancement was ever put forth. And how far have we come? And then obviously, we have COVID. We know that it disproportionately impacts women because women are the majority of those frontline healthcare workers. They're the ones who have lost jobs, maybe left their jobs, dealing with childcare and homeschooling, as I'm certainly doing. But then, of course, we know that Black communities and communities of color have been, disproportionately negatively impacted. And of course, we now see an economic downturn. But at the same time, in all of this, we are seeing women rise up. And I'm thinking about, the women heads of state who, managed through COVID with compassion and empathy and, listening to those outside voices of science and other experts, and who have led magnificently by putting the people at the center. And then, of course, the Black Lives Matter movement, to see so many women take such a bold stance. So I think it's, of course, and then we have a female vice president-elect. So it's, in a way, okay, it hasn't been a year where we have gotten to gather and celebrate how far we've come and look at what still needs to be done. But we've seen on display the power of women's leadership. And Obi, I wonder for you, as you've seen all that's happened, I know that you've taken a step back. You were running for president, of course, in Nigeria, and then really began to see that, the system was not set up for success. The system was set up to continue a cycle of corruption, of bad leadership, of leadership that wasn't going to serve the people. So I know that you've now pulled back. How are you thinking about this year, and particularly about women's leadership and your leadership? What do you think 2020 has taught us about leadership?
I think that what 2020 ended up doing for women is to provide the world analytical evidence on women leadership. So when you think of what we've seen of the disparity in the way that, or the very huge difference in the way that women leaders of countries have managed the crisis, I think it's lent itself to much more scrutiny of the way that women lead differently from men, and so we now know that ideas like resilience, like pragmatism, the fact that women would tend to cherish diversity of their teams and representation, and that women actually don't like groupthink, that they are comfortable with having a different opinion and that their ego is not bruised by that, the fact that they don't have to conform to gender norms, the fact that women leaders understand that problem solving requires all hands on deck, and therefore they are not going to build cliques, they are simply going to be more transparent about the things they're doing and involve more people in the decision-making process. We've seen that all of these things matter in terms of how a leader is able to get the best of results. And so when we look at the Prime Minister of New Zealand, or we look at Chancellor Angela Merkel, or we're looking at the President of Taiwan, or that the Prime Minister in Iceland and other places where women have shown considerable capacity to manage the crisis, we're learning a lot. We're not longer going to be in a place where we're saying, oh, be nice to us. We also can lead. No, we're able to use evidence to show clearly that when women lead, that nations are built in a way that ensures the dignity of the human life. Many of the male leaders were almost, just acting as if the virus was something to to come to afterward. But immediately there was this compassion that built up in the women that they don't want to lose a single person in their country. It meant that they were open to science, they were open to listening, they were open to feedback, they were open to inclusion, they were open to, just being innovative, they were ready to question and scrutinize everything. And so that lent itself to better results. And if we're in a world where we want better results faster, then we must be thinking of this whole inclusion agenda, because what the women leaders proved to us is that because women have often been the victims of inequality, they sure understand how to not entrench inequality. And so in the governance process, they have basically taken down inequality. And in the process of taking down inequality, they have shown us how we can build societies where we all come together and we can solve problems. Just look at how the nations in which these women led, how they came together. In most of the nations where people came together, didn't you notice better results? That's what women leadership is all about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Jamira, the networks that you are involved in, the movements that you're involved in, the youth movement, gun violence, and Black Lives Matter. Have you begun to see women rise up into leadership positions?
I mean, if we're honest, women have always been at the forefront of change throughout history. Oftentimes, we just haven't had the platform or the visibility to be able to showcase the impact that we've made. But I do think now is very different. There's been a unique interest in looking how women leaders, to Obi's point, are leading different and are making more substantial changes in communities, especially when you look at here in the United States around gun violence and police brutality and the movement for Black Lives that was founded in part by 3 Black women who recognized that there was a real need to elevate the intersectional voices of women who are directly impacted by these issues. And so I do think, when I first got engaged with Vital Voices, I never thought that the way I led as a woman was either different. I knew it was different, but I didn't know if it was good, right? I feel like so often whenever something is referenced negatively, it's always in relationship to like women. And when you grow up with 10 older brothers, so I never really thought that it was something positive. But as someone who works in workforce development, what we're now seeing is that even the skills for the future that we're trying to train young people for are oftentimes soft skills. They're skills that women have been able to master for so long. So critical thinking, problem solving, listening. And so I think what we're now seeing is a shift, not just in movement building, but also in industries around the world where folks are realizing there's something to be said about how women lead, the impact that they make and the contributions that they can offer into a workspace, into a movement, or into our everyday lives. So I'm excited.
We're starting to get questions coming in from the chat, which is very exciting to see some of these things, questions that people have for both of you, of course. I wanted to take one of them. This is coming in. How do we facilitate solidarity among young and mature women in order to succeed at moving the bar forward for women of all ages, races, creeds around the world? This solidarity is often a casualty of intergenerational, interracial, and class struggle.
That's a great question. And I like it.
Jamira.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. Shout out to who posed that question. So one of my favorite activists is Carmen Perez, who's one of the founding organizers of the Women's March. And she always says that I don't need an ally, I need an accomplice. Because I think an ally are oftentimes people who ideology wise, like they believe what you believe. They believe you should have rights. They believe you should have access. But I think an accomplice is someone who takes active efforts and actions to be able to ensure that those ideas are brought to fruition. So for folks who are trying to realize, how do you stand in solidarity with folks who don't look like you, who are from communities that you may never interact with? I think the question is, how are you using your power, privilege, to be able to elevate those stories in a way that honors the person telling it. And then also, I think it's really important to evaluate how you yourself might be contributing to those very vulnerabilities and your ability to have access and power and privilege. And so it really takes us looking within ourselves to figure out the role that we play, but then also externally figuring out what actions we can take in our everyday lives to ensure that we're elevating those stories, we're sharing space, and oftentimes we're giving up our privilege in order to ensure that someone else has access as well.
So Obi, I want to ask you, obviously as a former presidential candidate who's now working to reform a broken political system in Nigeria and beyond, how do you move past the status quo? And of course, moving past the status quo can't be about one person, right? Your job, obviously, next is to ignite those citizens into activism, which you have been brilliant at with the Bring Back Our Girls campaign. How has the reemergence of the End SARS campaign and the movement against the notorious squad of Nigerian police who committed widespread abuses and violence, has that played a role in getting people ignited?
I think that one thing that does work, and in an intergenerational way, to the the previous question Jamira just responded to, is really this consistency of the issues that matter to us in society. If in society we all agree that dignity of human life is number one thing, that no matter what color we are, no matter what ideology we believe, whatever we stand for, that the dignity of the human life is the dignity of the human life. And there shouldn't be any but or if or when or whereas. No, it's simply that the human being matters and that we must all rise to the defense of the rights and the freedoms of people. Now, if that consistency is understood well, then what happens is that from one generation to the other, there is this gratitude for the efforts that each generation makes to preserve this norm. You know, when we have gratitude for every effort, for every little stone or pebble that one generation made, then what would happen is that the older generation would be appreciated by the younger ones, and then the older ones will appreciate the younger ones who continue in the same tradition of ensuring that we're keeping that norm as our universal value. Now that speaks to why, for example, throughout my life, I have been one that spoke truth to power. I have been known in the society as that person who would speak when others would keep silent in the face of something that is wrong. I don't want to be applauded. I simply want to know that in my mind that I did not become an accomplice to silence that destroys society. And so what has happened with the End SARS movement, where the young ones are protesting brutality, is that they're suddenly saying, oh my God, these were the things Ezekwesili was talking about. Some of us were not paying attention then, but now we see that the system reacts exactly the same way to the issue of upholding the dignity of the human being. And so they take that message, they elaborate on it, they are more sophisticated in the way that they mobilize themselves to gain the kind of scale that we did not even have when we were in 2014, 2015, all the way to this, talking about the injustice that was done, the girls who were abducted from their school. So when I think of it in that way, it calls to mind what I have persistently done in my mentoring. In my mentoring, I say to people that for advocacy, we must be evidence-based. We cannot afford to just simply say something is wrong. We need to use analysis to show how what is wrong is taking society down. Nobody wants to be in a society that is down. And when we define our cause célèbre in that kind of way, we can get more people joining us and pushing in the same direction, so that for me, systemic change is possible. And that's why when I went away to do my research, I've come back with fixed politics as a systemic agenda. And I see many more people excited about that agenda and coming around that agenda and wanting to push until we can put the citizens at the center of the governance process.
Jamira, obviously in the last 4 years, we have seen people take to the streets, whether it's around gun violence, Black Lives Matter, gender equity, separation of families. Do you think there is a danger potentially in the United States, which we know has a ripple effect around the world? Is there a danger with now having elected, the first woman and first person of color to serve as VP, that people think, okay, the work has been done, and we can go back to our regular lives? That was a moment, right? How do we keep it going as a movement long term? And how do we really redefine activism and what it means to be a citizen? I feel like you're on the front line of this, so it must be something that you think about on a daily basis of how do you continue to spark this change?
Yeah, and I have this conversation daily with my friends, and I think many of us who grew up in the Obama era, who voted for the first time in 2008, we were excited about having a Black man as president. It was also the first time that a woman was also very close to winning a major party nomination, Hillary Clinton. And so we grew up in a very unique time within our history. And so I think for many folks who were excited about that election, we've now learned from it, meaning in the sense of we can get excited about a candidate and what they may represent to our communities and to the world at large. But we also recognize that we have to continue to put pressure on set candidates as they go into office to ensure they live up to what they promised, but also that we push them further to be more progressive and to look at what people on the ground in communities are actually saying and not listen to corporations or traditional leaders of traditional institutions of power. So I do think this is very different than past elections in many ways because Joe Biden was not everyone's ideal candidate. Many people are excited about Kamala Harris and what she represents, but I do think people realize that we need adequate change in communities. Otherwise, a division that will continue to grow will not just impact our communities, but will also continue to fester across borders and impact other vulnerable communities as they try to thrive and create opportunities for justice. So it's a weird time we're in. I think everyone is a little fatigued from the last 4 years of constantly feel like they had to advocate for something or for someone. But I do think we realize there's a time for being more strategic and being very clear with our ask, regardless of who's in office.
Well, thank you, Jamira. Thank you for your leadership and always being there on the front line. And Obi, thank you as well, doing that hard work. I know pushing in to make that sort of radical change, moving from the status quo to the status no. And we love you both for it. So thank you for being such shining lights of what leadership is all about. Thank you for joining us. And Sophie, I turn it back over to you. Really thank you so much for letting us have this conversation.
Well, thank you, Alyse, and thank you to you, Obi Jamira. What a remarkable way of ending that first day. So a big, wholehearted thank you from us. And what I will remember from this discussion is it's truly when we unlock the power of others that we are putting our leadership to the best use, and you amplify and manifest so much at that point. So thank you again. And now to you, dear participants, who has been remarkable in your participation and your questions, in your comment. I really wanted to thank you once again for today's session. With these sessions, the Women's Forum Global Meeting is officially launched, and the ambition is set for an in-depth reflection of what it will take to create a green and inclusive recovery. We hope that you are ready to roll up your sleeve and engage in the next 2 days of sessions. In the meantime, please don't forget to send your own story of inclusion in a 1-minute video to daringcircles@womensforum.com so that we can share these tomorrow and the day after. If you missed any of today's session, they are obviously available to watch on the womensforum.com website. So thank you again. You will see, we will see you all tomorrow at 10:30 Paris time. Maybe not for you, Alyse, because it might be a bit too early. But for our opening session with Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, Angel Gurria, Secretary General of the OECD, and Halima Yacob, President of Singapore. At 10:45, please join our partners in their networking room. And let me just finish by thanking you again and see you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.